Hi everyone, welcome back to another inking video where I ink Alex Saviuk's Spider-Man and Mary Jane. This piece was done for the Inkwell Awards. I started right away on Spidey's eyes. I normally do eyes first. They tell a lot of the story. You can't tell much of a story with Spidey's eyes, but let's just get started. I outline the eyes nicely, making sure the shapes are correct. I follow Alex's shapes. I don't deviate from them. And I go on to ink Spidey's head. Simple egg-shaped head, and I give it a little bit of weight as I go along. Later I can come back in and weight it some more with a brush or the pen. And it's just a simple egg shape, nothing much to it. Remember, you're drawing, you're not just tracing it, you're redrawing Alex's Spidey and Mary Jane with ink. I will continue on doing her arm. Don't forget digits and knuckles in her hand, back side of her hand. She's not a superhero, so she doesn't have lots of muscles there. Give it some weight. I do skip a little bit there at the cuff of her shirt. It's not perfectly skin tight shirt she's wearing. See, I bounce a little bit, give it a little bump there. Excuse all the flipping back and forth. I then jump to his hand. I like to draw hands very precisely and slowly. And we just do each finger one at a time. Ignore the webbing, ignore all of the costume details. It's just time to draw the fingers and the palm of the hand. Give it some weight there. I will ignore the web he's holding as well. I'll do that later. And I'll come down the arm, give it some weight, and as always, I will come back and weight these a bit more later. I don't change Alex's line work or anatomy, but Alex's pencils are not the tightest I've ever worked on. There is a lot of room for interpretation, and that's what the Inkwell Awards want from us. They want the inkers on these pieces to sometimes go to town and go crazy. I don't tend to do that. I tend to do a more respectful interpretation of the penciler's intentions. Sometimes I might tweak something or render something a little bit differently than the penciler, but that's how I approach it. When I go in on Mary Jane's, I went onto her face, but sadly my head blocked the video, the camera. So we won't have that. I got really close into her head there, and there's no video of me inking her face, just the back of my head. So I go on to his Spidey's other hand, same rule. Just do the digits, nicely drawn, and forget the costume details. Now we'll continue with Mary Jane. Inkers tend to bounce around a lot. The drawing is all there. Some inkers will start with the background, some will start with, I don't know, costume details or accessories. Some will start with the torso and leave the face for last. I will jump into the face and hands first since I feel they're the most important. And now I continue on to her belt, and I will do some other details on her pants, the stitching, and some other folds. And I bounce it. They're jeans. They're not perfectly, they're worn out. You should not have a perfect stitch on jeans. But before that, I will do the outside of her legs, get some weight into them. Always get ink on your pen. The pen I'm using is either the Hunt 103 or 100. As I had said in one previous video, it's a really sharp pen. It has a lot of bounce. Some inkers, artists don't like it because it has too much bounce, and it can very easily snap on the page as you're drawing and going back and forth. It's so sharp, it'll snag on the paper and you'll get a spray of ink. So you do have to be careful. You cannot push this pen much. You have to be very careful on pushing it. Pulling it is the name of the game with this pen. And I continue down, and I'll give some extra thickness to the cuff of her pants. A little bounce there. The same on the other leg. And I draw the entire figure all the way through before I go into rendering and doing all that fun stuff with the brush and little nicks and lots of little ticks and detail. I need to have the whole thing drawn out first. Another good thing is that if a job is late and you really need to get this thing out the door, you'd at least better have the entire figure inked, because not having a few stitches on the pants won't be as noticeable as not having her leg done. That's an old trick we used to do. Quick, get it done. At least it's done. Now the shoe, lots of little turns on the heel. Remember, it's a shoe that has been worn. It's most likely leather. And these lines don't meet. They're not perfect. So you give it some life, you let it breathe, and it's not perfect, just like a shoe. Comes around. And remember, the straps are wrapping around her ankle and her foot. They don't go straight across, and they have some weight to them as well. Just a touch. Draw it out. If you can go in one swipe, that'll be great. And here I'm doing, like I said, the stitching on the pants, just bouncing it along. You don't notice these little details when someone is walking past. You don't see it. You don't see it if it's 20 feet away. You know it's there. It's slightly there. It is not something that should draw attention to itself. Something that once it's printed and colored, it's a little detail that almost disappears. And I decided to make this video entirely in this inking piece in one video. I thought of breaking it up, but it just honestly I wasn't feeling like breaking it up. Toward the back half, I didn't think some of the pieces would be interesting enough to sustain themselves as a standalone video. So I've edited it down a bit, and I've also sped up some pieces. I normally don't like sped up art videos. I don't think you learn anything from them, but I think at least it'll give you an idea here of where I was what I was thinking, what I was doing. And the parts that are sped up later are going to be the background and some cleaning up and some of the webbing. The more important parts toward the front end of the video are normal speed. Patience is key. You go around, you draw your shapes, even for tiny little things that probably won't show up in the printed version, if this would be a printed book. His leg goes back in space. I outline the entire thing. I know some folks like to come in and play. I try to be disciplined and draw the entire figure with all their details before I come in, and as we inkers like to say, have fun with the brush. Spidey's feet have usually been drawn like, I guess, like a foot with a sock on it. He's never been really drawn as having a real boot. Again, remember everything in its shape, in form, around the leg, around. The same with the glove and the other costume details. They wrap around his torso, they wrap around. All right, now here we're speeding up a bit. We've already inked one foot coming back. And it's the same deal. Remember to get them to match, since she should be wearing the same style of shoe on both feet. Don't add 3 straps when you only have 2 on the other foot. These things happen. And later I'll come in and add some little nicks and details. So I'll come in with the spider. The 100, or just the 103, is a very thin pen, so I have to build up the spider's lines. When it came to the webbing, Alex almost gave us no indication of what the webbing should be, but he is going here for the current McFarlane style webbing that is all knotted and wrapped up. And I just follow his general shapes, but just keep adding webs and lines to it and build it up. This I did find at times tedious, and you have to get into it because there is so much of it and it's stretched up toward the page. I don't think I added that in the video. And you just construct it. I did reference Spidey's webbing on a McFarlane page or in Bagley and Romita Jr. Having not worked on Spider-Man, I don't think I may have done one Spider-Man job in my career. All right, Mary Jane's hair. What I wanted to do was, again, outline the hair and know the patterns that I'm going to draw. Alex had a large strand pulling away. I outlined her bangs, do the little pieces that are flowing in the wind with the pen. So I have a basic shape and idea of where I'm going. And then I'm going to come in with the brush and do the rest, since I feel there's a splatter. That's exactly what I was talking about before. The pen grabbed and it's snapped and I got ink sprayed all over the place. I'm not going to worry about it. Most of that is going to get covered up with ink anyway, so it's not a big deal. It would be a big deal if it had splattered into the sky or the rest of the page. And I follow Alex's pattern. Just follow it, but with a knowledge of what Mary Jane's hairstyle is normally done like, and having an idea of what I would like to do. Big, thicker chunks, smaller chunks, uneven. If it's too even, it doesn't feel natural. Now I've come in with the brush and I start weighting things, and I will follow the flow of the hair and the light pattern. Brush is a Winsor Newton Series 7, either a 3 or a 4, most likely a 4. Actually, that looks like a 3, actually. Sorry. Actually, that's not a Winsor Newton. It's a Raphael. I'll pick up whichever brush is handy, the Raphael series or the Winsor Newton. I find them both fine. I keep a bunch of them by my table, and whichever one is the one I was using the other day, I will pick it up. It really makes no difference to me. Keep going with the hair, get that strand a little thicker. Regarding the number of the brush, the size of the brush, there was a story. When I was at Marvel, I went to Jack Abel one day, and Jack was working on something. I don't remember what he was working on. And I asked Jack, to be clear, I was an intern at Marvel at the time. I was probably about 16, 17 years old, maybe a little older. And I asked Jack what pen he was using. And Jack at the time was an older guy, and he liked to tell stories, so he turned his chair toward me and he says, "Let me tell you a story." He put his pen down. "Let me tell you a story." Oh, geez, Jack is going to tell me a story. And he said he had gone into DC one day, and Joe Kubert was working on some Sergeant Rock cover. And he had asked Joe Kubert what pen he was using. And Joe Kubert turned and said, "It doesn't matter." And that's the thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what pen you're using. It doesn't matter what brush you're using. It's still going to look like Joe Kubert. It's still going to look like Jack Abel. It's still going to look like me. It's going to look like you. Now, if you want to achieve a certain effect, a certain feel, yeah, you might need a certain brush, a certain pen. But generally, it doesn't matter. Should you use a good brush? Yes. Will the work be drastically different? Maybe. But don't get too caught up on what pen it is, what brush it is. All right, so I've gone in and I've been rendering Spidey's legs and arms, and I come in and I'm still drawing, and I'm trying to decide, should this piece of his shin be black or gray? I decided gray because the backside of his thigh toward his butt and the cast shadow on his other leg are black. So I try to minimize the amount of black in this leg. I don't want it to look like a hole. And I just follow Alex's renderings here. Maybe pull it in a little direction that I might like. Turning that muscle. So this side, I've decided I'm not going to render it, I'm going to dry brush it. I couldn't tell you why I decided that. Probably because I didn't feel my rendering would be confident enough on that side. And I went with the dry brush. It's just a choice that I made at the moment, just there. I had no real thinking about it. Now I'll draw the other, and I'm trying to match the cast shadows from behind the leg that's in the foreground with the other leg. Following Alex's anatomy here. And I'll render it. And I'm gonna come back and give it a few passes to get that gray to turn black. All of this stuff takes practice to know how much pressure to put on your brush, how much ink to have, how fast you go. It takes years to figure this out. And there's nothing really I can say other than you just have to do it. You have to feel it. I used to just take pages and pages of paper and just do random brush strokes. Or I would just draw a hand, an arm, a leg, a face, a piece of hair, a texture, a piece of ground, a piece of metal. It's constantly on and on and on until you figure out how to use your tool. Following Alex's rendering here, giving the hand a little bit more weight. His abdomen, I don't want it solid black. Just a simple gray. That's it. No fancy stuff. Just her shirt, same deal. Don't attract attention to it. The fabric goes over the breast. And we've got a little bit of a shadow on the other side, a little bit of rendering there, just to indicate that piece is back there. And I thought I'd throw in a little gray on her jaw here. And we render the underside of her leg. Little by little. It's okay to go back. And now I'm sometimes I just like to play and go around and bounce around and touch something up a little thick. You know, as you're going around, you say, oh, I should make that thicker. I forgot to do that. All right, backgrounds. This is a Gillot 1950 pen. Hard to find. Very hard to find. Not that stiff. Has a little bit of bounce. All right. As you can see, here's where I've sped up the video. It's just a lot of ruling of lines. I angle the ruler with my fingers and I run the pen alongside the ruler. This pen has a section that's not part of the nib, so it just glides along the ruler. You will get inky hands. Be careful, because the ink, as you can see on the ruler, you just get ink everywhere. So you do have to be careful, because your hands will get ink on them. But the 1950 is it's a medium bounce. It's not completely bouncy like the 100 or the 103. It's not as stiff as the 102, which a lot of pros like to use. I personally don't like the 102 because it is so stiff. This 1950 lets me do these simple dead weight lines, but at the same time I can do bouncy things. See, I can give it a little bit of push and it gives me some thickness. If I'm drawing something in the background, same deal. But again, in this day and age, in this digital day and age, they're very hard to find. I may be down to my last few. I may have a stash of them somewhere, but finding them in a store, if you find any, let me know. I'll buy them off of you. So here I just continue to do the backgrounds, trying to keep it interesting and remembering undersides. But at this distance, you wouldn't see too much undersides and differences in little details on the buildings. I just zip through, and if you notice also it's gone a little faster because this is the tedious part, and hopefully we're not boring you too much. Remember your rules about the undersides being darker, and you can apply that to the ledges, the windows, these little air conditioning units. Always remember that buildings, New York, all buildings have lots of things on the roofs. Air conditioning units, electrical things, antennas, other things that I don't even know what they are. Vents, water towers, little shacks, all kinds of things. So put them in there and make them interesting. Give them some variety, some texture. Spidey lives in New York. He's not in some science fiction pristine metropolis where everything is perfect. No, it's New York. There are dirty water towers, buildings that are 100 years old, etc. All right, now we're on to his webbing. Webbing, of course, we leave for last after you've rendered everything else on Spidey. Then you can do the webbing. If you do it first, you may wind up with webbing that doesn't match the rest of the drawing form. And I'm using my 1950, which is a nice dead weight line here, because I don't want any variety in the webs. It's a simple dead weight pattern on his costume. I follow Alex's patterns, and Alex does the traditional Ditko Romita patterns. And remember, of course, the lines are in space, so they will wrap around the form and go off into perspective. Careful on the foot here, try to round them a little bit. And you don't have to get it all perfect in one shot. You can draw it out. It's sped up here so it looks like I'm going very quickly and not making any mistakes. But I wasn't going too fast, but I was going slow, trying to get it right. And we paused there for some reason. And continue. There are certain elements to his costume that are standard, and if you're not familiar with Spidey's design, look it up with Romita, Ross Andru, Romita Jr., McFarlane, and it's pretty simple stuff once you get to know it. It's probably one of the easiest costumes to do. It just takes a little bit of time just to do all this webbing. John Romita might have rendered these the other way because he didn't like that flower effect. Remember, each one goes around the finger. Around, around. And you just keep going until you have all your webs done. And make sure that they're consistent and they match from one side of his body to the other across Mary Jane's arm. You don't want them inconsistent there. It's always a tough call what to do on the spider there. Do you go through it, stop at the spider? I guess it depends probably if you don't want it to fill in the printed book, and what final your intention, the effect you want is. Sometimes if you go through the spider, it just looks a little messy and not very attractive. See, this is where Romita would have rendered these webs the other way to avoid this flower effect that he didn't particularly care for. It was completely artistic license. It made no logical sense. Logically, if you're doing it, this is what it would look like. And just carefully sculpt them out, draw them out. And there's a pause in my video there. Why is there a pause in my video? Alright. Probably paused for some reason or another with my pen or brush. Something was going on in the studio. So then we fill in the blacks and also do some weights on the figures. Blacks, I leave the blacks for last. They're the least fun of anything. It's just, you just have to do it. And here we're speeding up the video because everybody knows, well, you should know how to fill in blacks. Pick up your brush and fill it in. Load up your brush and just go in. You don't have to use the best brush. I generally don't. I might use a good brush in a small area like this to stay sharp, but in a large area I'll pick up an old brush whose days are numbered, and that's fine to fill in the blacks because it'll get a lot of ink and it won't wash off completely, so there's no point in really messing up a good brush just to fill in blacks. Use a brush that's on its way out. Ink has changed over the years. I don't even know what ink is good anymore. I used to use Higgins India ink and Higgins Black Magic India ink. The Black Magic was a little bit thicker, as I recall, and good for brush. Now the formulas have changed and you get more washed out inks from Higgins, and so I've tried Higgins, I've tried Dick Blake's Black Cat, Speedball, a variety of things. Some work, some don't. Generally, I like my ink thin because for the use of the pen, and the thick ones I find are too thick. One thing I did learn is that if you leave your ink bottle open, it just naturally gets thicker. But I have a tendency to leave it open literally for days on end, so sometimes it just gets too thick. And what you can use to thin it out is a little bit of a Windex, but not too much. Alright, now on to the webbing. A combination here of the old classic Ditko Romita webbing and the McFarlane webbing. And so it's just lots of strands, spaghetti strands wrapped around each other, back and forth, in and out, wrapping around. So I've done the basic structures. Now I just come in and give them some little textures and more wrappings around. Always remember the form. Always remember the form. This does not have to be perfect. This is very impressionistic. It's just to give you an idea of what's going on with the webbing. I just keep hitting it. And this is probably my 100 or 103, very sharp pen. And here I've sped it up a little bit. It's just to keep the video going. Put a few extra little stray strands, and I come in back to now I'm cleaning up the whole thing, and I'm putting extra textures on MJ's belt, on the buildings, little nicks, little tiles, the stitching on her pants, extra little wrinkles here and there. This is toward the end, and I clean up some renderings, little things I might have missed or nicks. See, I kind of float around and see things. Oh, that should go back in space. A little bit of a shadow texture here. And now I take my razor and I break up the buildings because, again, they're not perfect. They're concrete. They're bricks. They've been out in the elements. They're how many feet away, how many miles away? You're not going to see every little thing. And here's the final piece. And thank you for watching, and please subscribe. Take care.